There is a paradox hidden within human nature that has confused countless people throughout history. The kinder you become, the more you expect appreciation. The more you sacrifice, the more you expect loyalty. The more patient you remain, the more you believe others will recognize your value. Yet life often presents a different reality. Sometimes the person who gives the most receives the least respect. Why? Not because kindness is a flaw, not because compassion is outdated, but because human beings unconsciously interpret behavior before they interpret intentions. People rarely judge you by what you feel inside. They judge you by the standards you consistently communicate through your actions. If your kindness is always available regardless of how others treat you, some people may stop seeing it as generosity and begin seeing it as obligation. This is one of the oldest lessons about power, psychology, and human nature. Real strength does not abandon kindness. It protects it. Today, we explore why genuine kindness can sometimes lead to disrespect, and more importantly, how to preserve your compassionate nature without surrendering your dignity. Kindness is one of the most admirable qualities a human being can possess. It has the power to heal emotional wounds, strengthen relationships, and inspire trust. Every great civilization has praised compassion as a virtue because genuine kindness creates cooperation instead of conflict. Yet there is an important psychological distinction that many people overlook. Kindness is not the same as limitless availability. The moment kindness loses its connection to self-respect, it can begin to produce outcomes that are very different from what was intended. Human beings are constantly interpreting behavior. Long before they analyze words, they observe patterns. If someone consistently places the needs of others above their own, apologizes unnecessarily, tolerates repeated disrespect, or never communicates personal limits, people may unconsciously begin to view that behavior as normal rather than exceptional. This is not because kindness lacks value. It is because the absence of boundaries can unintentionally signal that there is little cost to crossing personal lines. Psychology teaches us that repeated behaviors shape expectations. What is repeatedly allowed often becomes assumed. Imagine a person who always agrees to every request, regardless of how inconvenient it is. At first, friends, coworkers, or family members may express gratitude. Over time, however, gratitude can quietly transform into expectation. The same favor that was once appreciated becomes something people simply assume will always be available. This gradual shift rarely happens through deliberate malice. More often, it reflects a natural tendency of the human mind to adapt to consistency. When generosity becomes constant and unconditional, its perceived value can fade, not because the act itself has become less meaningful, but because people grow accustomed to receiving it. This is why self-respect and kindness must always exist together. Healthy boundaries do not diminish compassion, they preserve it. A person who can calmly say, "I cannot help today," or "that behavior is not acceptable," is not rejecting kindness. They are protecting the conditions that allow kindness to remain sincere, instead of becoming forced or resentful. Boundaries communicate that your time, energy, and emotional well-being also possess value. They remind others that generosity is a choice, not an obligation. There is another important psychological principle at work. People often respond to consistency more than intention. If someone repeatedly sacrifices their own priorities to avoid disappointing others, observers may unconsciously conclude that this person does not prioritize themselves. As a result, others may begin to do the same. Respect frequently mirrors the standards individuals set for themselves. When you demonstrate that your own needs matter, you quietly teach others to recognize that value as well. The lesson is not to become distant, suspicious, or emotionally unavailable. The goal is to practice intelligent kindness, kindness guided by wisdom rather than fear of rejection. You can remain generous while also protecting your peace. You can be compassionate without accepting mistreatment. You can forgive without inviting repeated harm. In fact, these distinctions often make kindness more authentic because it is offered freely instead of being driven by guilt or the desire for approval. Ultimately, the strongest kindness is never rooted in self-neglect. It comes from inner confidence, emotional balance, and the understanding that respecting yourself does not reduce your ability to care for others, it strengthens it. When compassion is supported by healthy boundaries, it earns not only appreciation but also lasting respect, allowing your generosity to remain a source of strength rather than a reason others take you for granted. People instinctively respond to perceived value. And one of the clearest ways value is communicated is through self-respect. This is not about arrogance, pride, or believing that you are better than others. It is about understanding that your time, your energy, your attention, and your emotional well-being are meaningful resources. Human psychology is remarkably consistent in this regard. We often appreciate what appears intentional, protected, and limited far more than what is constantly available without condition. When someone repeatedly gives without pause, always agrees without reflection, or continuously places the needs of others above their own, observers may unconsciously begin to assume that this level of sacrifice requires no acknowledgement. What was once seen as generosity gradually becomes expected behavior. This shift rarely happens because people consciously decide to become disrespectful. More often, it happens because familiarity changes perception. The extraordinary slowly becomes ordinary when it is offered endlessly, without balance. Imagine entering a beautiful library filled with rare books. If the librarian carefully preserves each volume, people naturally treat the collection with respect. But imagine another library where anyone can take books, damage them, or leave them scattered without consequence. The books themselves have not changed, but the way people treat them has. Human beings often respond to the standards surrounding something before they recognize its inherent worth. The same principle quietly applies to our own lives. The standards we maintain teach others how to value our presence. When we consistently communicate that our time is always available, our boundaries are flexible, and our emotional needs are secondary, others may unconsciously accept those signals as the norm. This is why genuine self-respect is not selfish, it is educational. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to demonstrate what healthy relationships look like. Calmly saying, "I can't commit to that right now," or choosing to step away from conversations that repeatedly diminish your dignity is not an act of rejection. It is an act of clarity. You are showing that kindness and self-respect are not opposing forces. They are partners. The most emotionally mature individuals understand that protecting their own well-being allows them to continue contributing positively to the lives of others without becoming exhausted or resentful. Modern psychology also highlights the importance of reciprocal relationships. Healthy connections are built on mutual investment rather than one-sided sacrifice. When both people contribute care, honesty, and consideration, trust grows naturally. But when one person consistently carries the emotional weight while the other simply receives, imbalance begins to replace appreciation. Over time, this imbalance can quietly erode respect, not because kindness lacks value, but because its constant availability removes the awareness of its significance. Reciprocity is not about keeping score or expecting immediate repayment for every good deed. Instead, it reflects a shared commitment to honoring each other's humanity, effort, and limitations. There is another important principle hidden within human nature. Confidence attracts respect because confidence communicates stability. A person who respects themselves does not constantly seek validation, nor do they abandon their principles to avoid temporary discomfort. They understand that disagreement does not equal rejection, and that saying no when necessary does not make them unkind. This quiet confidence reassures others that their identity is rooted in values rather than approval. Ironically, people often feel safer around individuals who possess clear boundaries because those boundaries create predictability and trust. They know where they stand and they recognize that the relationship is based on honesty instead of obligation. History repeatedly demonstrates that respected leaders, teachers, and mentors combine compassion with firmness. They listen with empathy, but they also uphold standards. They encourage others, yet they remain faithful to their own principles. Their kindness is never confused with weakness because it is supported by unwavering self-respect. They understand that leadership begins with personal discipline. Before guiding others, they first learn to govern their own emotions, protect their own values, and remain consistent under pressure. Ultimately, respect begins as an internal decision before it becomes an external reality. The way you speak to yourself, the promises you keep to yourself, and the boundaries you maintain all shape how others perceive your value. When you honor your own time, others are more likely to honor it as well. When you protect your peace without hostility, people learn that your kindness is a gift rather than an obligation. The goal is never to become distant or uncaring. The goal is to ensure that your generosity flows from strength instead of insecurity. True kindness reaches its highest expression when it is guided by wisdom, balanced by self-respect, and offered freely. not because you fear losing acceptance, but because it reflects the character you have intentionally chosen to build. Many people believe that being emotionally intelligent means always being available, always understanding, always forgiving, and always putting other people's needs before their own. While empathy is undoubtedly one of the greatest human strengths, emotional intelligence extends far beyond the ability to feel compassion. It also requires discernment, the wisdom to recognize when kindness is creating healthy relationships and when it is unintentionally encouraging unhealthy behavior. This distinction separates mature compassion from self-neglect. Human nature is complex. Every individual carries different motivations, emotional wounds, ambitions, and insecurities. Some people genuinely appreciate generosity and respond with gratitude, while others gradually adapt to it until they begin to expect it. This is not always the result of malicious intent. Often, it is simply how the human mind works. People naturally become accustomed to repeated patterns. When someone consistently gives without limits, others may unconsciously stop viewing those acts as extraordinary and start seeing them as ordinary obligations. What was once received with appreciation slowly becomes expected. This is why emotional intelligence demands observation before reaction. It asks you to notice patterns rather than isolated events. A single mistake deserves understanding. A repeated pattern deserves reflection. If someone continually ignores your boundaries, dismisses your feelings, or only values your presence when they need something from you, emotional intelligence encourages you to examine the relationship honestly, rather than excusing every behavior indefinitely. Compassion should never require you to deny reality. Many individuals become trapped in the belief that saying yes is proof of love. They fear disappointing others because they associate boundaries with rejection. As a result, they agree to commitments they cannot manage, tolerate disrespect they should address, and sacrifice their own emotional well-being in the hope that their kindness will eventually be recognized. Ironically, this often produces the opposite outcome. Instead of creating deeper respect, constant accommodation can reduce the perceived value of their time, attention, and effort. When people never protect their own priorities, others may unconsciously conclude that those priorities are not important. Discernment allows kindness to remain intentional rather than automatic. It teaches you to ask an essential question before giving your energy. Will this act genuinely help this person, or will it simply reinforce an unhealthy pattern? Sometimes the most compassionate response is assistance. At other times, the most compassionate response is allowing someone to take responsibility for their own choices. Growth rarely occurs when every consequence is removed. Just as a teacher does not complete every assignment for a student, emotionally intelligent individuals understand that support should encourage strength, not dependence. This principle also applies inwardly. Emotional intelligence includes respecting your own emotional needs with the same sincerity that you respect the needs of others. If you continuously ignore exhaustion, suppress disappointment, or silence your own voice to maintain harmony, resentment often grows beneath the surface. Genuine kindness cannot flourish where hidden resentment exists. Sustainable generosity requires emotional balance. It requires moments of rest, honest communication, and the courage to decline requests that conflict with your values or well-being. History consistently demonstrates that the most respected individuals were not those who pleased everyone. They were those who combined compassion with conviction. They listened carefully, spoke thoughtfully, acted generously, and yet never abandoned their principles to gain temporary approval. Their kindness possessed quiet strength because it was guided by wisdom rather than insecurity. They understood that empathy without judgment can become vulnerability, while judgment without empathy becomes coldness. True emotional intelligence lives in the balance between these two forces. Ultimately, kindness reaches its highest form when it is directed by clarity instead of guilt. When you understand your values, recognize unhealthy patterns, and confidently protect your peace, your generosity becomes more meaningful because it is offered freely rather than compulsively. You no longer give because you fear rejection or crave acceptance. You give because your character chooses generosity, while your wisdom determines its limits. That is the difference between merely being nice and being emotionally intelligent. One seeks approval, the other expresses strength. One exhausts itself trying to satisfy everyone. The other creates lasting respect by remaining compassionate without ever abandoning self-respect. One of the most consistent observations in psychology and human behavior is that people often learn what is acceptable not from what we say, but from what we repeatedly allow. Words certainly matter, but actions leave a deeper impression because they create patterns. Every relationship, whether personal, professional, or social, is shaped by these patterns over time. If someone repeatedly interrupts you and you quietly accept it, they may begin to assume that interrupting you is acceptable. If promises are consistently broken without accountability, those broken promises can gradually become the expected standard. If your time is treated casually and you continue to make yourself available without expressing your needs, others may unconsciously conclude that your time carries little value. This process is rarely the result of deliberate cruelty. More often, it reflects a basic feature of human psychology. People adapt to the standards that are consistently reinforced. Imagine a teacher entering a classroom on the first day of school. Before a single lesson begins, students are already paying close attention to how the teacher responds to behavior. If disruptive actions receive no response, those actions often become more frequent. If fairness, consistency, and calm expectations are maintained from the beginning, students quickly adjust to those standards. The same principle extends far beyond the classroom. Every interaction communicates something about what we consider acceptable. Even silence can become a powerful message. When silence repeatedly follows disrespect, it may unintentionally suggest permission rather than patience. This does not mean every disagreement requires confrontation or every mistake demands correction. Wisdom lies in recognizing the difference between isolated incidents and recurring patterns. Everyone makes occasional mistakes, speaks carelessly, or overlooks another person's needs. Healthy relationships leave room for forgiveness and understanding. However, when the same behavior continues without acknowledgement or change, repeatedly ignoring it can weaken the foundation of mutual respect. Addressing such situations calmly and honestly is not an act of hostility, it is an act of clarity. Clear communication gives relationships the opportunity to grow instead of allowing unspoken frustrations to accumulate. Many people hesitate to establish boundaries because they fear appearing unkind or difficult. They worry that expressing discomfort will disappoint others or create conflict. Yet avoiding every uncomfortable conversation often produces a different outcome. Instead of preserving harmony, it can slowly create imbalance. One person continually adjusts while the other becomes increasingly accustomed to receiving without considering the impact of their actions. Over time, this imbalance can lead to emotional exhaustion, resentment, or the feeling of being invisible despite giving so much. Ironically, the very kindness intended to strengthen the relationship begins to weaken it because it lacks the support of honest communication. Emotionally mature individuals understand that respect is built through consistency rather than intensity. They do not rely on anger, dramatic reactions, or constant reminders to communicate their values. Instead, they demonstrate those values through steady behavior. If they make a commitment, they honor it. If they need rest, they say so respectfully. If someone repeatedly crosses an important boundary, they address it with calm confidence instead of bottled-up frustration. Their responses are measured, not impulsive. This consistency creates trust because others know where they stand. Human beings naturally observe patterns. We watch how people respond under pressure, how they protect their time, how they react to unfairness, and how they treat themselves. These observations shape our perceptions far more than occasional speeches about values or respect. In many ways, people are constantly teaching others how to interact with them through everyday decisions. Every respectful no, every honest conversation, every fulfilled promise, and every calmly maintained boundary becomes part of that lesson. It is not about controlling other people's behavior. It is about communicating your own standards with integrity. The goal, therefore, is not to become rigid, defensive, or emotionally distant. Genuine kindness remains one of the greatest strengths a person can possess. The challenge is ensuring that kindness is guided by wisdom rather than fear of rejection. Calm consistency allows compassion and self-respect to exist together. It reminds others and yourself that generosity is a choice, not an obligation, and that healthy relationships flourish when mutual respect is expressed not only through words, but through the patterns of behavior that both people consistently uphold. Confidence is often misunderstood. Many people imagine it as dominance, loud speech, relentless self-promotion, or the ability to command attention in every room. Yet psychology and human nature reveal a very different truth. Genuine confidence is usually quiet. It does not need constant recognition because it is not built upon external validation. It is built upon an internal understanding of one's own values, principles, and worth. This kind of confidence communicates itself through consistency rather than performance. It is seen in the individual who remains composed during disagreement, who speaks thoughtfully instead of impulsively, and who refuses to compromise deeply held values simply to gain approval. Ironically, the people who appear the calmest are often those who have done the greatest amount of inner work. They have learned that reacting emotionally to every criticism gives unnecessary power to the opinions of others. Instead, they focus their energy on what they can control, their own actions, decisions, and character. Human beings naturally respond to emotional stability. When someone remains calm under pressure, it creates a sense of reliability and strength. This is not because they never experience fear or frustration, but because they have developed the discipline to manage those emotions rather than allowing those emotions to manage them. Emotional intelligence teaches that self-regulation is one of the strongest predictors of healthy relationships, effective leadership, and long-term success. A person who can remain respectful while setting clear boundaries often earns more lasting respect than someone who constantly seeks to prove their authority through forceful behavior. Calmness should never be mistaken for passivity. Instead, it reflects confidence in one's ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Consider how people behave during moments of conflict. Some immediately become defensive, raise their voices, or attempt to dominate the conversation. While these reactions may appear powerful on the surface, they often reveal underlying insecurity. When self-worth depends upon winning every argument or receiving constant agreement, even small disagreements can feel like personal threats. In contrast, someone with genuine confidence listens carefully, considers different perspectives, and speaks with clarity without becoming consumed by the need to control every outcome. Their sense of identity remains intact regardless of whether others agree with them. This emotional independence creates an atmosphere of trust because people recognize that they are interacting with someone who values truth over ego. There is also an important relationship between confidence and boundaries. Individuals who possess quiet confidence understand that saying no is not an act of selfishness, but an expression of self-respect. They recognize that every commitment represents an investment of time, energy, and emotional resources. Saying yes to everything eventually means saying no to personal growth, meaningful priorities, or emotional well-being. Therefore, they make decisions deliberately rather than automatically. They understand that declining unreasonable requests does not diminish their kindness. Instead, it protects their ability to continue serving others in healthy and sustainable ways. Their generosity remains genuine because it is freely chosen rather than driven by guilt or fear of rejection. History consistently demonstrates that respected leaders, thinkers, and innovators rarely built influence through endless attempts to please everyone around them. They developed credibility by remaining consistent even when facing criticism. Their confidence was expressed through discipline, patience, and unwavering commitment to their principles. This consistency sends a powerful psychological message. People tend to trust individuals whose behavior remains aligned with their values across different situations. Predictable integrity creates psychological safety because others know what to expect. In contrast, people who constantly change their beliefs or boundaries to satisfy different audiences often struggle to earn lasting respect because their identity appears uncertain. One of the greatest transformations a person can experience occurs when they stop measuring confidence by how many people approve of them. External approval is unpredictable because it depends upon changing preferences, circumstances, and expectations. Internal confidence, however, grows through repeated acts of courage, honesty, and self-discipline. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, maintain a healthy boundary, admit a mistake with humility, or choose integrity over convenience, you strengthen your own sense of identity. These seemingly small decisions gradually reshape how you view yourself, and that self-perception inevitably influences how others respond to you. Ultimately, quiet confidence is not about becoming emotionally distant or indifferent toward others. It is about developing such a stable relationship with yourself that your kindness no longer depends upon receiving appreciation in return. You continue to treat people with compassion because it reflects your character, not because you seek validation. You remain respectful without accepting disrespect. You remain generous without abandoning your own needs. You remain calm without becoming passive. This balance represents one of the highest forms of emotional maturity. It allows kindness and strength to exist together, proving that true confidence does not announce itself through noise. It reveals itself through consistency, self-respect, wisdom, and the quiet certainty that your value does not rise or fall according to the opinions of others. The strongest form of kindness is never rooted in fear, insecurity, or the desperate need to be accepted. It emerges from inner strength, a quiet confidence that allows a person to care deeply for others without abandoning themselves in the process. This distinction is one of the most important lessons in understanding human nature. Many people spend years believing that the more they give, the more they will be loved, respected, or appreciated. They become the person who is always available, always understanding, always forgiving, and always willing to put someone else's needs before their own. While these qualities may appear noble, they can become psychologically dangerous when they are driven by the fear of rejection rather than genuine generosity. Human beings are remarkably sensitive to the emotional motives behind behavior. Even if people cannot consciously explain it, they often recognize the difference between kindness that is freely chosen and kindness that is offered in exchange for approval. When your generosity becomes a strategy to avoid conflict or gain acceptance, you quietly communicate that your self-worth depends on how others respond to you. Over time, this creates an imbalance where your identity becomes tied to pleasing everyone around you. Ironically, the harder you work to earn validation, the less secure you begin to feel, because your emotional well-being is now controlled by forces outside yourself. True self-mastery begins when kindness is no longer dependent on external recognition. A person with genuine inner strength helps others because it reflects their character, not because it guarantees appreciation. They understand that every act of generosity is a choice, rather than an obligation. If their kindness is acknowledged, they remain grateful. If it is overlooked, they do not lose their sense of value. Their confidence comes from living according to their principles, rather than chasing applause. This creates a profound emotional freedom. They are able to say yes with sincerity and no without guilt because both responses arise from honesty rather than fear. They recognize that boundaries are not walls designed to keep people away. They are guidelines that protect mutual respect. Just as a river follows its banks to remain powerful and life-giving, kindness requires healthy limits to preserve its strength. Without those limits, even the purest intentions can become exhausted, leading to resentment, frustration, and emotional burnout. History repeatedly shows that individuals remembered for their compassion were rarely those who sacrificed their identity to satisfy everyone. Instead, they possessed unwavering principles. They served others while remaining faithful to their values. They understood that discipline and empathy are not opposites but partners. Emotional intelligence is not measured by how much pain you can silently endure. It is measured by your ability to balance compassion with wisdom, patience with discernment, and generosity with self-respect. This balance prevents kindness from becoming exploitation. It allows relationships to grow through mutual appreciation rather than one-sided dependence. When people know that your kindness comes with integrity and clear standards, they are more likely to respect both your generosity and your presence. There is also a deeper psychological transformation that occurs when you stop seeking approval through constant giving. Your decisions become calmer because they are no longer driven by anxiety. You stop over-explaining yourself, apologizing for healthy choices, or feeling guilty for protecting your time and energy. You realize that disappointing someone occasionally is not a failure of character. It is an inevitable consequence of living honestly. Not everyone will agree with your boundaries, and that is perfectly natural. Those who genuinely value you will adjust because they respect the person behind the kindness. Those who valued only your endless availability may resist, revealing that they appreciated your compliance more than your character. This realization is not an invitation to become cynical. It is an invitation to become wiser. Wisdom understands that authentic relationships are strengthened by truth, not sustained by self-neglect. Ultimately, the strongest kindness is an expression of abundance rather than deficiency. It flows from a heart that is secure enough to give without expecting constant validation and disciplined enough to protect its own peace. Such kindness is neither weak nor passive. It is courageous because it remains compassionate in a world that sometimes misunderstands compassion, yet it never forgets that self-respect is the foundation upon which lasting respect from others is built. When your kindness is guided by inner strength instead of approval seeking, it becomes impossible for others to define your worth. They may appreciate it, misunderstand it, or even take it for granted, but none of those reactions change who you are. Your value no longer depends on being endlessly available or universally liked. It rests upon something far more enduring: the quiet confidence of knowing that you can extend grace to others while remaining unwaveringly loyal to yourself.